The Book of Remembrance of Moses, the Tablet of Gabriel, Chapter 16. An account of fourth son of redemption, Zabdi, who led the church during the life of Messiah, and who enabled Messiah, by his walk in the flesh, to bring the eternal life of redemption to all who choose to embrace holiness. An account of the childhood, youth, education, and ministry of Messiah. And it came to pass that after the murder of Goker-Harem the first, another man of the holy order who was old came in to serve the people of true Israel. Reference number 302. See 1 Kahee, chapter 7, verse 15. His name is unknown. And he was from Elasa, and his mission was to teach those of the church in Jerusalem and surrounding towns how to live in the manner that Zadok had established. And the people of the cities of Israel found it necessary to do the repentance, to have all things common, and to practice common consent. And they had to learn how to do prayer watches, and they had to adapt to a way of life in holiness with those who kept the purse, so they could stand clean before the Lord at all times. And the people there happily made their way into a more holy walk. And after the passing of this high priest, the people went for some time without a man of the holy order. And I saw that there was not a line of men who vied to fill this order of service. So respectful were the people of the sanctity of the holy order. And after a time, a young man who was the son of Simeon came into this calling, and his name was Goker-Harem II. And Goker-Harem II led the people in the church, and established the great watch, and called forth the birth of Messiah. And in his old age, before he died, Goker-Harem II blessed the baby Messiah. And now we move to the fourth and final son of redemption, for the third flame on the tablet of Gabriel, and his name is Zabdi. And he shepherded the people of the church, all during the time Messiah was in the flesh upon the earth. And the full account has been written by Urim, and it will suffice, and it follows below. Reference number 303. 1 Kahee, chapter 8, verses 24 through 91. Chapter 9, verses 41 through 47. Chapter 10, verses 16 through 20. And it came to pass that the new high priest of Shabuah in those days was called Zabdi, which means given of God. And his wife was called Shalom. And she was the younger sister of Joseph. And it was the policy of the church that no one should interfere with the life of the family of Joseph and Mary, but they would discreetly cause some who were inscribed in the book of the Merari to quietly dwell at all times near Messiah, in whatsoever settlement of Nazareth he should be found. And because of this, men of the inscription accompanied them when they were led unto the land of the far country. And it came to pass that word was sent quickly unto Shakath, even before the sun was set, that Messiah was fled for his little life. And Zabdi had been a high priest for only 3 months, and he was faced with this crisis. And it came to pass that Zabdi consulted the Lord with Urim in the midst of the men of renown in Shakath. And the word of the Lord came to him, and the Lord said that in their watch they should ask all the Eerkodeshiy to protect Messiah from the designs of the king who was called Herod, which means to behold the hero. And because of the absence of the little feet, all the Eerkodeshiy were urgent to obey them. And there immediately fell upon the king great and loathsome humiliations, and scourges and sufferings, and the air he breathed was against him, insomuch that his lungs began to shrivel, and the water was against him, insomuch that when he would bathe, great scabs and a loathsome itch came upon his body, and the food he ate rebelled and did not give him life, and his bowels decayed within his belly, and his private parts became putrefied upon him. And it came to pass that it was as if all the Eerkodeshiy spewed him out of their mouths. And in those days Herod died, and it was said by those who were close to him that he was the living dead. And all the people in Israel engaged in great speculations as to which of his many sins had brought these scourges upon him. But the people of the church knew which sin it was, and they were urgent before the God in heaven and the Eerkodeshiy. And when he was dead, the Merari brought word to Joseph, And he returned with the little feet into the land of Israel. And he once again took up his life amongst the settlements of Nazareth. And Regal was heard to sing songs of little feet. Now it was during these times that the Merari presided over the council of the community in all the land of Israel, and they were exceeding diligent in all their judgments and in considering carefully each one who would come to enter into the covenant of the community. And in Israel it was only the male children of the rich and powerful who received formal learning and education with regards to reading and writing, and stone tablets had ceased in Israel with the passing of Moses. But within the community of the church, the heavenly tablets were used for instruction since the days of Gokar Harem I, and the church greatly encouraged all the people that they should be learned. In this way, everyone, male and female, could have the advantage in their visions, and in their virtue and in their pursuit of holiness, that they might come to understanding, and thereby better keep the law. And they all were taught a knowledge of the truth and an understanding of his counsel. And it came to pass the young Messiah began his learning under the hand of his parents until the age of 7, and they taught him as any parents would who have sons and daughters in the class for children. And it came to pass that when Messiah was about to pass out of the class for children into the youth class, which was from 8 to 18 years of age, the men of renown selected learned men who would instruct Messiah and his companions. And it was determined that they each, in their turn, would instruct him during these 10 years. And these men all felt the importance of the honor that was entrusted into their hands in instructing the Messiah of Israel in the religion of Shabuah. And they made their plans and prepared themselves with all diligence. And it came to pass that one day, as these things were getting under way, Messiah and his mother were passing by the way, and they heard the shouts of a multitude. And little Messiah broke away from the side of his mother and ran into the midst of the multitude to discover the cause of the shouts. And when his mother came upon him, he was witnessing the stoning of a woman, and he heard a man saying, "This is for the law which says, when he threw this stone." And the bruised and broken body of the woman lay upon the ground, and he viewed her as her groanings had ceased. And Mary, taking him by the hand, hastened him away from the place. And Messiah was greatly moved. And when they reached their home, he asked his mother, "Mother, by what law did they do thus unto the woman?" And she said, "They have many laws, by which they accomplish such things against the lives of people. But I know not which of the laws of Aaron they used to justify that which you witnessed this day." And she comforted him. And he said, "Mother, what was her sin?" And she shrank back from disclosing unto him the manner of fornication in Israel. And from that day on, the lad became intent on learning the ways of the temple religion, which thing was not the custom of the people of the church. And he became determined to know of the sins of men. At first his instructors supposed him to be distracted by his witnessing the stoning, but a year went by in this way, and he was not satisfied to learn of Shabuah. And it came to pass that he went across the way one day, and there he encountered a man who dwelt nearby. And he inquired of him concerning the law of Aaron. And the man lent him some writing, which contained the temple religion, and he brought them home. And he desired of his instructor that he might study them. And the instructor was horrified, and he inquired of the elders of Nazareth and Kinnereth as to how he should proceed. And he informed them of the firm determination of Messiah to study the law of Aaron. And it was decided that Messiah should be separated out from the rest of his class for a time, for the parents of the other children did not want their children to learn such things. And the man began to instruct Messiah in the law of Aaron. And the men of renown were notified in Shakath that Messiah was being instructed in the law of Aaron. And Zabdi said, "Better that we should teach him than the priest of the temple humor him a while, and the thing will pass." But Messiah could think of nothing else but to learn of the law of Aaron and of the sins of the people, and his instructor stumbled in his attempt, for he had never been taught in the law of Aaron, and in the diligence of his preparation he had thought only to shield Messiah from such things. And it came to pass that Messiah continually wanted to know more of the sins and corruptions of the people, And he asked to visit prisoners to inquire of them concerning their sins, and he would ask often to visit the temple when they were in Jerusalem, so he could view the sins of the place, and his mother forbid him. But he persisted until one day Joseph took him to the temple, and it was toward the end of his 9th year. And there he spoke with the money changers and the merchants of the offerings, and he asked them questions to see if he could discover their sins. And he openly inquired of the scribes concerning their sins, and they were irritated at him. And he remained all that day watching the priest of the temple and asking questions of his father. Now it was the custom among those who practiced the temple religion under the law of Aaron that they would gather on their Sabbath in reading houses to read from their writings, and Messiah was determined to go there to discover the sins of the people. And it was not according to the law of the community rule that a person of the church should do so, but he persisted in his questioning until his mother took him there on one of their Sabbaths, and he listened intently. And when they left, he asked his mother concerning all the sins of the people. And it came to pass that the thing became of concern to his parents and those in his settlement, for the people of the church were of a mind to shield him from such things, so that he could be holy and unspotted by association with the things of the world. Then one day in his 10th year, Mary found him talking with a merchant in the street concerning harlots in the regions of the Gentiles. And his mother snatched him away from the man, and his parents began to be alarmed, and they requested the assistance of Zabdi and Sakaka. And the second to the high priest was sent unto Nazareth and Kinnereth. But before he arrived, the news was heard by Mary that the warriors of the Kittim were bringing one bound along through the streets. And all the mothers made haste to gather up their children out of their sight. And when Mary sought Messiah, he could not be found. And her neighbor said, He is upon my housetop for to see the Kittim with their prisoner, and he seeks occasion to speak with them. And Mary ran across the way and got herself upon the housetop, and there she found him viewing the Kittim as they passed by beneath them. And when they were gone, she scolded him and said, My son, restrain yourself and only learn of the sins of Israel. And as they were passing on the stairway to enter the house below, he was weeping, and turned to his mother and said, But mother, if I learn only of the sins of Israel, who will learn of the sins of all the people of the nations for my Father in heaven? And his mother embraced him and wept, and a foreboding entered into her heart, and she thought, Is it fair that my child should be burdened with the sins of all people? Are not the sins of Israel sufficient? At that moment the second to the high priest arrived from Sakaka, and Joseph told him concerning the merchant in the street, and Mary told him concerning Messiah upon the housetop. And she rehearsed unto him the words of Messiah upon the staircase. And after he had been informed concerning all these things, he returned unto Sakaka, and many there considered these things with alarm. And it came to pass that Zabdi inquired of the Lord by Urim, and the Lord spoke to him, and told him that in these things be comforted. For Messiah will not go astray to follow after the law of Aaron, not after sin, but his Father in heaven was declaring great things unto him in his heart. And the people of the church were chastened, for even in the midst of the church, and with the continual prayers of the men of renown, Messiah as a child was alone in his pursuit to fulfill the will of his Father. And immediately they all repented before the Lord, and a search was made to find one among the people of the church who was learned in the knowledge of the temple religion. And they discovered a man in Jerusalem who had been a temple priest when he was young. And he had departed away from them and entered into the covenant. And he had been numbered among the men of renown for many years. But at this time he was too old to join in their doings. And his name was Latasha, which means one who instructs. And this old man had much knowledge of the law of Aaron and of all the sins of Israel. And the woman who carried the purse in Nazareth of Jerusalem purchased for Latasha all the writings of the temple religion that spoke of these things, and she was ashamed in her heart that the substance of wealth from the storehouse of the Lord should be given for such things. But she was informed that it was thus decreed by Urim and Sakaka, and she was comforted. And it came to pass that Messiah at this time was 10 years old, And for the next 4 years he was instructed by Latasha in the law of Aaron and all the strayings in Israel. And he and Latasha became fast friends, and he abode near Joseph all the remainder of his days, and Messiah called him Master. Now all these 4 years were spent in Jerusalem, for the men of renown had determined in their repentance that the family of Joseph should dwell there for the completion of the learning by Messiah in the temple religion. And there were prisoners there, and Messiah visited them. For he would accompany Joseph when he went to purchase flour for their bread, and prisoners labored for the high priest of the temple, grinding flour in the mills, and they were chained to the rods of the millstones when it was time to rest. Their keeper would remove them and allow them to sit by a basin of water and eat. Now the younger keeper was called Obed by the children of Israel, and he became accustomed to Joseph and Messiah coming to visit the prisoners, and they would give them to eat of their fig cakes, and butter and honey. And Messiah inquired of them concerning their sins. One had stolen the cow of his neighbor, which was reserved for the temple, and he had stolen things many times before, and one had spat, and the wind had carried it upon the garment of the high priest as he was passing by. And the duration of his time to serve was 1 year, and he was young, and his name was called Eleazar, reference number 304, Lazarus in Greek. And Messiah loved him and prayed for him, and theirs was the bond of friendship. Now it came to pass that when these studies were completed, his family returned unto Kinnereth. And in those days Semihazah came hard against Joseph, and those with influence in Kinnereth falsely accused him when a portion of a house fell down, and they said it was poor workmanship that had caused a man the grief of loss. And the men of the church gave of their substance and their labor to remedy it for him, but Joseph knew it was Semihazah. At this time Mary had 6 children, and when Joseph had determined that his family was secure and provided for in community, he went into Shakath to serve with the men of renown, and to gain strength for the task of his life. And in this way the efforts of Semihazah were turned away from his family. And the desire of Messiah in his youth to know about sin did not abate. And they taught him concerning all things, starting with his grandfather Israel, when he established Jeshurun for his people, and commencing down even unto his own time. And they taught him concerning all the Decadarchiy and of their pollutions. And it came to pass when he was 12 years old, that he went into the temple without the knowledge of his parents, when his family was in Jerusalem. And there the men of the place, who were very learned, sat about in a public place to seek occasion before all the people, to expound upon their much knowledge. And the people would ask them questions, and they would display their learning with great swellings. And on this day they found Messiah before them, and they knew he was of a private sect of the Nazarenes, by his manner and dress. And he began to question them, and they were astonished at him, for he knew of their law, and Messiah was inquiring of them concerning their strayings. And he would cite their law to them, and ask them why they did not do according to the manner that it was prescribed in their law. And many of them could not answer him a word, and they all were much embarrassed before one another because of him. And it came to pass that the next day was a public day, and the men were again assembled to hear the inquiries of the people concerning important matters. But Messiah was again before them, as he had passed the night in the temple, and they were discussing who among them should answer his questions. For a crowd had gathered, and they shrunk back from answering him before the multitude. And when they were about to despair for who should answer him, his mother came and got him, and took him out of their midst. And it came to pass that when he was 14, and for the next 2 years, he learned about the sins of the Kittim, and all the wickedness of the people of the far country. And in those days Joseph had a brother in the city of Joppa, which was beside the great sea. And there were many merchants and much traffic from the nations. And the brother of Joseph labored among those who tended the loading of ships. And there were many people of the nations there, and many languages were spoken. And Messiah lived with his uncle for a season in Nazareth of Joppa. And while he was there, his eyes beheld the wonders of the world and the sins of the nations, and his understanding increased before his Father in heaven. Now in Jerusalem, the people of the church could not renew Shabuah year by year, as the people of the temple religion did not keep the same Sabbath day. And the sounding of the trump of summons, when it was not their Sabbath, would cause a great uproar. So they were obliged to renew Shabuah in Sukkot, and also in other various places in Israel, where the people were familiar with the people of the church, and would accept the sounding of the trump when it was not their Sabbath day. And in the 16th year of Messiah, he heard for the first time on Sabbath morning at sunrise the sounding of the trump of summons for Shabuah. And Messiah was much moved upon at the sound of it, and it pierced him to his very center. And he cried out and hastened himself to see, and the thing so moved him that the elders of the place, when they heard of it, sent for the men of renown in that place. And it was decided that he should go in the company of his fellows, who were his youthful companions, and go unto Sukkot for the duration of the weeks of Shabuah. And the men of renown there could teach him, and he could learn from Zabdi all things concerning Shabuah. And word was sent ahead that Messiah was coming to Sukkot for the renewing of Shabuah. And the men of the place made haste to purify themselves, and set all things in order. And there for the rest of the 7 weeks, Messiah and all his troop were instructed in the matters of Shabuah, and they commenced with the war in heaven, and expounded unto them all things. And the men opened up to them a knowledge of the city of Enoch, and they rehearsed the establishment of Shabuah, and all the history of that religion with Shem and Zedekiah. And every Sabbath morning Messiah would accompany the trumpeters at sunrise, and thus the 7 weeks passed. Now all this time the men of the place were careful to ascribe Shabuah to the Son of God, and they durst not mention the Messiah of Israel. And they rehearsed the covenant of Shem by saying, the Son of God should be in and through all things, and that all the Eerkodeshiy should obey the Son of God. And they chose their words carefully, so as not to burden him with their expectations of him. And he observed the renewal of the covenant of Shabuah as one of the faces in the multitude who witnessed it. And he watched the dancers of the Song of Eve and the blessing of the altar, and his heart was moved, and Zabdi was constrained to alter the words of his proclamation as a high priest of the covenant, to not say the word Messiah, but say the Son of God. And after Messiah witnessed all these things, that it was over, and they were in the midst of the feast, Messiah said to Zabdi, I go a-walking. And he left alone. And Zabdi, seeing him going off alone, sent 2 young men of renown to follow after him at a distance, and keep him in sight, and thus watch for his welfare. Now neither Messiah nor the men who followed him took provisions. And Messiah took his journey with rapid pace for 3 days, and went beyond En-gedi unto the wilderness of Pisgah, and there in a large cleavage in the earth, reference number 305. This was the crater where Sinai has stood. He dwelt for the space of 10 days, while he fasted and prayed, and pondered all he had beheld in Shabuah. And there was a spring of water down the way, that ran on the way toward the salt sea, but it dried up in the sand, and there he would go for water each day. And on the 10th day he came early to water, and found the 2 men who were sent to watch after his care. And he said to them in surprise, What brings you, brethren, hither? And they answered, We were sent to watch out for your welfare, and we intended to stay at a distance to not disturb you, but you came upon us here at water. And the Lord said, How do you fare? And they answered, We have had no food now for these 13 days, but water only. And he gave them bread to eat, and they knew not from whence it came. And it came to pass that they returned unto Sukkot, the Lord having compassion on them for their fasting. And when they were returned, a meal was prepared, and after they bathed, they sat down to eat, and Messiah sat by Zabdi. And in the midst of the meal he leaned over to Zabdi and looked upon him, and he said, Master, who is the God of Shabuah? And Zabdi was filled with the Holy Ghost and could hardly speak, and he replied, The Messiah of Israel. And Messiah answered him not a word. But when he returned home, his parents declared that he had left a boy and returned a man. And thereafter he became serious and sober of mind, and he plunged into his studies of the religion of Shabuah with great interest and diligence. And for the next 4 years he visited many of the settlements of Nazareth, and he spoke with them, and he ate with them. Thus he spent the next 12 years being active in his studies and ministry in the church. And after he entered into the covenant of the community at age 20, he did his part and performed ministry in the church. For he loved to teach those who were preparing to take the covenant, and those who sought the way to learn the joys of repentance. And it came to pass that in his 20th year, he and John, the son of Zacharias, and a band of youth with whom he was raised, came to Secaucus to enter into the covenant, and these were happy times for Messiah and the people of the church. Now it was in Secaucus year by year at ingathering that any who would enter into the covenant must come, and Secaucus was set aside as the only place in Israel where a person could enter into the covenant. And in this way, every person in the church had visited Secaucus at least one time in their lives, and the ceremony was performed each year on the last Sabbath of ingathering, and all who wished to take the covenant must come before the council of the community in full assembly in Secaucus to gain permission to enter into the covenant. And all the people knew Messiah was come with his fellows, and one was heard to jest with another and say, "Should we approve Messiah to enter into the covenant?" And the other replied, "If he is not suited, then there is not a man in Israel who has entered it worthily." And every man realized that the Messiah of Israel had come to enter into the covenant of the community, and they all were diligent before the Lord. And when it came his time to stand in the line of inscription, he chose to go last behind all the others. Now it was past the season of rain, but clouds had gathered that morning, and Zabdi and all those who were assembled beheld him as a lock of his hair was cut, to be used as the element of righteousness, in preparation for him to stand alone before the altar. And it was the first of his hair to be cut in his lifetime, even as it was for all those raised up within the church. And they all bore record that he stood forth and witnessed before his Father in heaven, that he would love him with all his heart, might, mind, and strength, and that he would love him utterly, and do all things according to his word to him, and that he would do all things that the Father revealed to him according to the desires of his heart. When he placed his hair upon the coals of the altar, and as the smoke ascended, lightning split the sky from west to east, and the thunder shook the earth, and the song Israel sang unto his rock of witness was heard to come from above and beneath, and it filled the earth of all who were present, and some who were traveling in the way even said that it was heard resounding in the cliffs in the wilderness. And the Lord had his sleeves rolled up, as he had been helping in the task of the morning meal, and he had forgotten to roll them down for the ceremony. Now each one who attended was very desirous to be proper for the seriousness of the ceremony, and Mary, his mother, who looked on, was embarrassed that his sleeves were rolled up. At the time Messiah had finished, and the thunder had sounded, Zabdi stood to make his declarations, and to read from the sacred writings, for it was according to their custom that the high priest who was inscribed first should speak, after the last one had entered into the covenant. And he chose to read in Isaiah where it said, reference number 306, Isaiah chapter 53, "Who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness. And when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief. And we hid as it were our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs, and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes are we healed. All like sheep have gone astray, we have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is dumb. So he openeth not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment. And who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken, and he made his grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Thereafter will I divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he hath poured out his soul unto death. And he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. And it came to pass that for those who had ears to hear, it could be known that the arm of the Lord was in that very day being made bare before their eyes. And Zabdi in this manner, and in his wisdom, sought to prepare the church for the task that lay ahead. For Messiah and the church, for many, had become complacent, and had begun to expect the ministry of Messiah would be theirs all his days, and perhaps he should die of old age, the church having had him to themselves all his days. Thus Abdi troubled the waters, and called the church and those on watch to all diligence. For the church had called forth the arm of the Lord, and he was now in their midst, and they all would be subject to the joys and the sorrows of his task. And the people of the church were shown plainly the difficulty of the task that lay before their Messiah. And it came to pass that the men on watch began to gird themselves with righteousness, and they sought stones in the wilderness. And Kahee greatly marveled that Zabdi should so plainly unfold by the words of prophecy the task of Messiah before the eyes of the people. And all the multitude of the church began to wait and wonder as to how all these things might be brought about. And it came to pass that in the 8 years that followed, Messiah ministered before the face of the church, as any man of renown would, and he preferred to teach those who were preparing to enter into the covenant, and he healed many by purifications. And in those days Messiah and John dwelt in Shakath, and he would only purify in the pool of Eden. Now the pool of Eden, where the lustrial water first entered Shakath, was considered the pool of novices. And when they asked him why he would not purify in the other pools, he replied that his task in those dispensations would come soon enough, and he desired to rest in the waters of Eden. And it came to pass that his wisdom was great in the eyes of the church, for he taught and acted with all diligence and care, and was firmly in control of all his behavior. And in those days many among the Merari were relieved, to see him firmly in the covenant and safe within its confines. One day Zabdi approached a group of people who were discussing the doings of Messiah, and some said he should have learned about Shabuah in his childhood and about sin as a man. And Zabdi spoke unto them and said, Herein lies the great wisdom and mercy of God. For Messiah learned of the sins of men, when his heart was tender with years, and he beheld with the eyes of a child. For this reason he shall always look upon those who suffer with their sins with the tenderness of a little child. And his compassion shall engulf even those who have corrupted their own way with false religions and the lust for power. And the innocence of his charity shall exceed all bounds before the eyes of the wicked, and all men among the wicked. Even kings and rulers shall say, Alas, we see no cunning nor malice in him. And his innocence shall be before even the eyes of his enemies. And when they do whatsoever they will to him, they are compelled to say that they unjustly accused one who was without guile. And his childlike innocence in the face of sin and wickedness is that which will empower him with great power, even insomuch that, except for the wicked of the temple, he may turn the whole face of Israel unto their God. And it came to pass that the years passed by, with him ministering before the church, until his 28th year, and his ministry could have endured in this manner amidst the church for many years. But in his 27th year, the conditions set forth in the law of the king that would indicate that it was time for him to act began to manifest themselves, and the church was faced with a time of decision. For it could be discerned that the mood of all the people in Israel was to search to find the means to return unto the Lord and to achieve holiness of heart. And this was not the condition a few years before Messiah, nor would it be just a few years after. So Zabdi saw that it was time to act, according to the word of the Lord in the law of the king, and these conditions that called for the public ministry of Messiah were brought on by the oppressions of the Kittim and the blatant wickedness of those held in esteem by the temple religion. But the high priest in Jerusalem and all his band were not aware of this change in the hearts of the people, and they sought only to preserve their positions of esteem and their ability to get gain, and they supposed in their hearts that they would abide their time until they could throw off the yoke of their oppressors. And thus was the way prepared that Messiah would be a dire threat to them, for he had the ministry and the opportunity to answer the needs of a people searching for purity. And should Messiah teach them the way of repentance and persuade them to love the God of Israel and embrace all things pure and holy, those in power over them would lose their great positions and be compelled to change their religion and the traditions of their fathers and to labor for their own support and be humble before all men. But Semihazah did not shrink back in the face of it, and he put it into the heart of the high priest of the temple, who was called Chavah, whose name means to be depressed, that he should begin to teach and to declare that their law of Aaron was indeed their nation and the vision of Israel, and that if the people should be persuaded to follow after the Torah of Jeremiah and abandon their law, they would lose their nation and their place as a people to dwell upon the earth. Now it came to pass that in the 28th year of Messiah, Zabdi called for a council and grand assembly, where the councils of the communities in all of Israel should be assembled in Shakath, to determine how Messiah should proceed. And Joseph began to be old, and at the time of this assembly he was ill, and requested that he be carried unto Shakath, to be present for this decision. And there, after all things were accomplished in their decision, he died, being 75 years old. And he was buried in Shakath. And here was the great man, whose marriage had been the element of righteousness, to join the Messiah with all the Eerkodeshiy, and he passed on unto his Maker. And it came to pass that John began his ministry at that time, but Messiah remained at Shakath, and he was diligent to keep the law before his Father in heaven. And it came to pass that Messiah traveled across the Jordan, and he went into the city of Beth Peor, which means house of openness. Reference number 307. Number 1047, house of Peor, comes from number 6465, a gap. Beth Peor was also named Baal Peor, from the deity worshipped there. See number 1187. Thus, in chapter 10, Beth Peor is called the house of Baal, away beyond the Salt Sea by Jericho. And he also went to the southeast of the Salt Sea, reference number 308, Elasa. And there he ministered before the face of the people of the church, who dwelt there in large numbers. And they were in a place not wrought upon by oppressors, nor traveled through by merchants. And when Messiah would return unto Shakath, he would inquire of John and learn of his doings. And it came to pass that Messiah journeyed up the Jordan, and he tarried among the stalwart of Ebedel, upon the slopes of the Golan, in the ruins of an ancient city called Yarmuk. And one day he saw a multitude at the Jordan with John as he looked down. And he went and witnessed John in his ministry and teachings and disputations with the prominent of the reading house in Shibboleth. And he beheld the example of John. And John stood by water that flowed between large rocks, and he spoke to the people concerning the Sabbath. For they accused him of baptizing on the Sabbath day. And John said, Is it not lawful to do good works upon the Sabbath day? How is it that the priests of the temple may labor to sacrifice on the Sabbath day? And Messiah withdrew himself, and was not seen by John or the multitude. And after these things Messiah prepared for his baptism, and he went to Succoth unto the men of renown who were in their watch. And Zabdi inquired with Urim, and the Lord God told him that it was time for Messiah to begin the day of his public ministry. And it came to pass that John was baptizing at the crossing of the river Jordan with the road to Damascus beyond Bethabara, reference number 309, the house of crossing over. And there were warriors stationed there to guard the way of the crossing, and many of them were gathered together to hear John, and also many travelers stopped in the shade by the wayside to rest in their journeys across barren lands. And a multitude was gathered before John, and the princes with him were wearied for their much teaching and baptizing. And in the midst of warriors who were coming into the water to be baptized came Messiah, and they were obliged to put off their weapons and garments of war. But Messiah appeared in the midst of them in his purity, and John was taken aback, and he said, Behold, the Lamb of God. And Messiah would that he should baptize him, and John did so. And it came to pass that Kahee saw that Messiah was baptized into his personal covenant, to be obedient unto his Father, in being the Messiah of Israel to all mankind. And Kahee saw him washed in the same water that the warriors and the multitude were washed in, and righteousness was before the eyes of Kahee, and he beheld a great thing in righteousness. Now Messiah had been purified with water, or that is to say, baptized many times before in Succoth and in his work in the church, but this was his baptism unto the world. And Kahee saw that the water that washed him flowed down and went into the darkness of the Dead Sea. Now understand that the waters of almost any stream on the earth flow from place to place, even unto the sea. And the sea is all the waters that flow upon the face of the land, gathered unto one. And the sea in the eyes of water is eternity, for there is life there in abundance. But the water that washed Messiah went down into the salt sea, which flows nowhere and has no life in it. And it is not the gathering of many waters, but only the waters that washed him. And the waters that washed him did not wash away his sin, for he had none. But they flowed down into the dead, and it flowed down unto the death of all of us, into our dead parts when we were blind, or deaf, or crippled, or maimed in body or spirit. And it flowed down into our hurts and despair and our wanderings to find a way. For he is the living water, and he brings life where there is death. He brings health where there is sickness, and joy where there is despair. And so as Messiah prepared himself to go below all things in his public ministry, even so far as to find and bless those without a conscience, he used the feelings of his Father as a weapon. And Kahee saw that he was invincible before the powers of hell, because of the power of the loving kindness of his Father, and he was a true son of his Father. And it came to pass that the only desire of Messiah to have man believe in him was so they would believe in and cling to his Father, whose loving kindness he always bore witness of, and never at any time did he consider that believing in him for his sake could accomplish greatness in the lives of men. For he had no plan of his own, but he ever only bore witness of his Father, and desired that all men believe in him for the sake of his Father, and for the glory of his Father. And he forgave and healed many for the sake of his Father. And he grieved over those things that were put in place by Semihazah, and those who loved darkness, to prevent the people from knowing his Father. And it came to pass that in those days he went to Succoth to inquire of the one inscribed first, concerning how he should proceed in his challenge to the high priest of the temple and his religion with its broad corrupting influence in Israel. And Zabdi shrank back from what he saw before the Urim, and he put the breastpiece upon Messiah, and he affixed the Urim and Thummim that he could see. And Messiah beheld through the eyes of his Father concerning all the manner of his doings in going below all things. And Messiah sat quietly a while, and he returned the Urim and thanked Zabdi, and they embraced. And after he left, Zabdi instructed the men of renown, each one in their task, and they prepared for the suffering of Messiah. And Zabdi said, Your task this day before the God of Israel is to instruct all the Eerkodeshiy, to obey all the desires of Messiah in his heart, yea, every whit, and to hold their peace, and they must not fail to do all things, according to the exact tenure of the desires of his heart. And Zabdi knew that all the Eerkodeshiy were going to suffer more than at any time since the creation of earth, and he knew that all the purposes of God were a-doing, and none of them could fail. Reference number 310, end quote. And as we move now into the account of the crucifixion, I must come to rely on all that which has been written, for when I saw and witnessed the crucifixion by Urim for the first book of Kahee, it was the most heartbreaking and difficult time of my life, and it took some years before I could bear to even read the account and see it all again. And I love the Lord so much, it is just too difficult to record it here, and so I will refer you to read the account in the book of Remembrance of Kahee. Reference 311, 1st Kahee, chapter 10, verse 20 through 108. As I think of all that Zabdi accomplished as a son of redemption, I am able to appreciate the difficulty of his task, and his task was unique among all those called upon in bringing to light the flames of the love of Anokeesed. For there were thousands of Essenes in Israel, and all of them knew that Yeshua was the Messiah of Israel, and it was essential that at no time was the Lord to be presented to the world in that light, but only at his own initiative. Thus he would be free to act according to his Father's word to him, with no pressure to do anything because of the expectations of the people. Surely this would be an almost impossible task with so many fervent supporters, combined with the heightened emotions of being accompanied by the Romans and of the nation being in the throes of what it meant to be a holy nation for the Lord. And on top of all that, those in control of the temple religion stood to lose their place and their very identity because of the influence of Messiah and his ability to minister even to the point of raising the dead. Indeed, it was a monumental accomplishment for Zabdi to navigate his way through every crisis so successfully. I really believe that he was greatly aided by his daily use of the Urim, and also his and the people's extreme efforts to keep the virtues of the watch rule, reference number 312, often calls the manual of discipline or the community rule, and to be obedient to the instructions of the temple scroll. And thus we see that even according to the 40th law, Zabdi intervened all during his ministry so that Anokeesed could guide the people in such a way that by their account, all the peoples of the earth can know that there is an afterlife and choose to prepare for it with holy living or not. And to explain more the nature of the third flame, Ezekiel brought about the information that would allow the law that was found in the court of Josiah to be restored, and he established the parameters of the law so it could be preserved. But it was Zadok who established a law-abiding culture, which was exemplified by the Essenes, and that culture became the foundation for the spiritual empowerment of the sons of redemption of the third flame to call forth the birth of Messiah. And Messiah's task was to place the law into all the souls of men. And this same culture of law keepers will also empower the sons of redemption of the fourth flame to prepare the way for the law to apply to the very present moment of every person to be born as anticipated at the final judgment. Now know that while Gabriel gave the law of definition and Jacob put the law into all creation to give rise to the book of life, Messiah put the law into the soul of every vision of created purpose that has ever been found upon the earth except the Nephilim. Now understand that when Motsah is the living water, he is the messenger of salvation, and when he is the living bread that came down from heaven, he is the herald of redemption. And how he put the law into the soul of each person came when the man that Anokeesed became experienced the sins of mankind in the temporal world, and the knowledge of it was carried into Elda, and Elda replied and responded by using the law of Jeshurun in the creation of the world as an invitation for the Father Anokeesed to enter into all the forms creation to be one of the four spirits of life. Thereby the Father was enabled to live in a temporal world with his children, and through the law of Jeshurun, Motsah applied the oneness of the love of his Father. For each human soul as if it was the only reason for his father to create. Thus, the desires of Anokeesed found in each of the laws are specifically for you, and Motsah, by his walk in the flesh, enabled the first decree of creation, which says, I can be a father to man in creation by the power of the intervention of the agency of my Son, who is the flesh, as are all men. And Messiah is the mediator of the covenant of Gabriel, and that which he accomplished in building the law into all the souls of mankind gave rise to the redemption signified by the resurrection, which resurrection is the complete fulfillment for the plan of redemption that brings us all to one day stand before Anokeesed to determine where we will go into eternity. And every cry for a Redeemer is recorded in heaven in the book of glory, and every feeling of mankind and creation to be redeemed back into the presence of their father Anokeesed entered into the tomb where Messiah lay. And with all the accumulated forces of righteousness at work and at the ready, it was impossible to Messiah to remain in the grave. And the man that Anokeesed became was resurrected back to life and burst the bands of death for us all. And the book of glory will shine forth to be a strong witness to every incident where the presence and mind of Anokeesed has revealed himself, and the lightning strike on the waymark of resurrection shall be a strong witness to show that redemption has come to the faithful. This concludes the book of Remembrance of Moses, the tablet of Gabriel, chapter 16. Shalom, family.